Imagine spending $6.4 billion of your own money to build a bridge, finishing every bolt, every tower, every inch of concrete, and then walking up to the ribbon with the giant scissors in hand, realizing you still need someone else's permission to unlock the doors. I'm Bo Kaufman, and this is the Sanity Project, where we dig past the headlines to find out what's actually underneath them. Today it's the Gordie Howe International Bridge, Windsor to Detroit, the busiest trade corridor on the continent. Canada paid for the entire thing itself. But buried inside a 2012 agreement was a blind spot nobody wanted to talk about, because building a border crossing and controlling one turned out to be two very different things. 14 years later, that blind spot came due, and the deal that finally opened the gates raises a much bigger question about who actually owns a border at all. Let's get into it.
You know, usually when you talk about building a massive piece of infrastructure like a bridge, you assume the absolute hardest part is the engineering.
Oh yeah, for sure. The physics of it all.
Right. You figure out the physics, you pour millions of tons of concrete, tension the steel cables, and, secure the billions in financing. And once the physical structure spans the river and that final bolt is tightened, you just assume you've crossed the finish line.
Yeah, you just cut a ribbon and let the cars drive over it.
Exactly. But imagine spending $6.4 billion to build a state-of-the-art international crossing. And you pay for the entire thing out of your own pocket.
Right.
You physically complete the masterpiece. And then literally, as you are walking up to the ribbon with the giant scissors, you realize you still have to negotiate with a foreign capital just to get the doors unlocked.
It's wild. It completely transforms a massive engineering triumph into, basically a high-stakes geopolitical hostage situation.
It really does. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We're tackling that exact multi-billion-dollar puzzle today, looking at the brand new Gordie Howe International Bridge connecting Windsor, Ontario to Detroit, Michigan.
It's a fascinating situation.
And real quick, if you have been following border politics and you already think the original builders should have locked down stronger guarantees before a single shovel even hit the dirt, hit the like button right now or drop a comment. We really want to see where you stand before we start pulling this all apart.
Yeah, getting a pulse on that is great. But setting the geographical and economic scene is essential here, too. We are not talking about some quiet rural border checkpoint.
Well, no, definitely not.
According to the Global Infrastructure Hub, this specific Windsor-Detroit trade corridor is actually the busiest commercial land border crossing between Canada and the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And it handles roughly 30% of all Canada-U.S. trade that moves by truck.
30%. That is almost a third of the entire terrestrial supply chain just funneling through one specific corridor.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is why understanding how this bridge got built and, how it almost didn't open, it requires looking really closely at a fascinating web of actors.
Right.
And the fatal flaw in analyzing this story is treating the United States as one unified entity.
Oh.
It's just not. We have the government of Canada, the state of Michigan, the U.S. federal government, the province of Ontario, the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, and of course, multiple distinct border agencies on both sides.
So if we just blend the state of Michigan and the federal government in Washington together, we miss the entire trap.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to figure out how this happened, we really have to travel back to 2012 and look at the original agreement that started it all. Because on paper, it was a masterpiece of problem solving. But it had this fundamental vulnerability built right into its DNA.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like you and your neighbor agree to build a shared driveway. You offer to pay for all the concrete, all the labor, the landscaping, literally everything.
Sounds like a great neighbor.
Right. And you do this with the promise that you'll charge a small toll to anyone who visits to just recoup your costs over time. But you forgot one tiny detail. The Homeowners Association actually owns a padlock on the gate at the end of the street.
That is exactly it. And back in 2012, Canada essentially signed an airtight, brilliantly drafted contract with the guy mowing the lawn, not the HOA board.
Wow.
But to be fair, the original crossing agreement genuinely was an incredible achievement for its time. It solved an immediate existential problem. Michigan was either unwilling or just constitutionally unable to finance a multi-billion-dollar project on its own following the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah, the money just wasn't there. And Canada was in a position where they absolutely needed this bridge to exist, right?
Yeah.
The Canadian economy is incredibly reliant on trade with the U.S.
Heavily reliant, yeah.
And looking at the University of Windsor's Cross-Border Institute, they point out that the automotive supply chain in particular treats that specific border like a conveyor belt.
Exactly. Because just-in-time manufacturing relies on extreme predictability. A single vehicle assembly plant might require, 1,000 trucks a day.
1,000 a day? That's insane.
It is. A transmission or an engine block might cross that specific border 5 or 6 times during the manufacturing process before a finished car actually rolls off the line. So Canada simply could not afford to let that corridor choke on aging infrastructure.
So Canada steps up and just makes a massive offer. They literally tell Michigan, hey, we will foot the bill. Under the 2012 agreement, Canada agreed to pay for the construction of the bridge, the massive land acquisitions required in Detroit, and they even paid to rebuild the interchange connecting the new bridge to Interstate 75 in Michigan.
Which is wild. Buying a U.S. interstate interchange was just an unprecedented move. But without it, the bridge would basically dump thousands of trucks into residential neighborhoods, just rendering it completely useless.
Right, a bridge to nowhere.
Exactly. So, in return for absorbing all this upfront cost, the agreement stipulated that tolls for both Canada-bound and U.S.-bound traffic would be collected exclusively on the Canadian side. Those tolls would slowly reimburse the Canadian government for the billions it had advanced.
Okay, so when we look at the structure of how they pulled this off, they used a crown corporation, right? The Windsor Detroit Bridge Authority. And for anyone unfamiliar, a crown corporation is essentially a state-owned enterprise that operates at arm's length from the government, so it functions somewhat like a private company. And they use a P3 model to build it.
Yes, a public-private partnership. The Crown Corporation brings in a private consortium to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain the bridge for a 36-year period.
Wow, 36 years.
Yeah, and this transfers a lot of the construction risk, things like cost overruns and material delays, directly onto the private builders. The bridge itself would be jointly owned 50-50 by Canada and Michigan, governed by an international authority with equal representation.
That sounds pretty balanced on paper.
It was. They even navigated the incredibly complex Buy America laws by securing a waiver so that iron and steel could be sourced from either side of the border.
Okay, and the engineering they chose reflects that massive capital commitment too.
Yeah.
They built an 853-meter cable-stayed main span.
Right, and cable-stayed architecture relies on these massive towers with cables fanning out directly to support the bridge deck. It is stunning to look at.
Gorgeous, yeah.
But from a financial perspective, it means almost all of the cost is front-loaded. You cannot build half a cable-stayed bridge, open it to generate some early revenue, and then finish the rest later.
Yeah.
You literally have to commit the full billions before a single car can cross.
Right. Which brings us to the blind spot. The vulnerability in my HOA analogy from earlier. Because this 2012 agreement was struck between the government of Canada and the state of Michigan. Securing land rights and state highway access from a governor, that is a massive win.
It is a huge win.
But running an international border, a governor does not have the constitutional authority to process passports or inspect international cargo.
No, not at all. Those functions belong exclusively to the U.S. federal government.
So here's where it gets really interesting. A lot of partisan critics look back at this structure and say the Harper government in Canada completely failed by not locking Washington into a stronger, binding commitment back in 2012.
You hear that a lot, yeah.
But is that a fair assessment? Could a Canadian prime minister have actually forced the U.S. federal government into a binding operational guarantee back then? Or is this just the luxury of hindsight?
Well, evaluating this requires separating a genuine contractual weakness from just, partisan blame. Because in 2012, forcing a binding multi-decade operational guarantee through Washington would have likely required a formal treaty.
Oh, and treaties are notoriously difficult.
Exactly. Treaties in the United States require a 2/3 supermajority in the Senate to ratify. So, in a highly polarized political environment, getting that kind of consensus for a regional bridge project would have taken years, if it was even possible at all.
Okay, so bypassing the U.S. federal gridlock and forming a state-level partnership with Michigan was actually a very clever workaround just to get the shovels in the ground.
It was a pragmatic necessity.
Yeah.
If they wanted to start construction, they had to do it this way. Michigan could guarantee the shared ownership and road connections, but they absolutely could not legally guarantee the future cooperation of U.S. federal authorities.
Right, specifically U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, and the immigration agencies.
Yes, because CBP requires federal funding. If Congress or the executive branch decides not to allocate the budget to hire the hundreds of officers needed to sit in those booths, or, if the federal agencies refuse to grant the final security certifications, the bridge literally cannot legally process a single vehicle.
So the investigative analysis from the Sanity Project concludes that labeling this simply a, quote, Harper failure, it ignores the sheer impossibility of the 2012 political landscape.
Completely ignores it, yes.
However, defending the original deal as operationally complete is also equally flawed, right? It solved the question of who would build the physical structure, but it left the door wide open regarding who could politically prevent it from actually functioning.
That is the perfect way to put it.
And that door stayed open quietly for 14 years. While the concrete was poured and the massive towers climbed into the sky, the vulnerability just remained invisible. Fast forward to early 2026. The physical structure is a marvel. The massive, sprawling ports of entry on both the Canadian and U.S. sides are completely built out.
Ready to go.
The $6.4 billion has already been spent, and suddenly the political landscape shifts. U.S. President Donald Trump publicly threatens to block the opening of the bridge.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is the concept of a stranded asset. Usually that applies to things like coal plants rendered obsolete by new regulations.
Sure, something that lost its value.
Right. But here, we have a pristine, physically complete bridge that is effectively worthless because it lacks operational availability. Without the federal staffing and the final certifications, it is just a very, very expensive monument spanning a river.
So if I'm sitting in Ottawa in early 2026, my leverage in this negotiation is mathematically zero.
Absolutely zero.
I have $6.4 billion stuck in the mud. I can't exactly repossess a concrete pillar. I can't threaten to pack up the bridge and take it home.
You're completely stuck, which forces Canada back to the negotiating table, resulting in the July 2026 agreement in principle. And we need to be incredibly precise about what this document actually is.
Right, it doesn't replace the old one.
No, it does not rewrite the 2012 ownership agreement at all.
Right.
Michigan and Canada still own the bridge 50-50. The P3 consortium is still running the maintenance.
So it's an addition.
Yes. Think of the 2026 deal as a supplementary arrangement. It is an additional political and financial mechanism layered on top of the original structure, designed specifically to secure the U.S. federal cooperation needed to open the doors.
Okay, let's break down the actual mechanics of this new deal then, starting with the financials. Canada agreed to pay 50% of the net bridge and crossing-related revenues for the first 15 fiscal years of operation.
And the word net is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Oh, it changes the entire math. If it were 50% of gross revenue, Canada would be handing over half of every toll dollar collected before paying a single light bill.
Which would be catastrophic.
Exactly. But net revenue means they subtract the operating costs first. So who decides what goes into that operating cost bucket?
That is the critical nuance that determines how much money actually crosses the border. Operating costs for a mega bridge include, snow removal, toll collection staff, basic maintenance, and security.
Normal stuff, yeah.
Right. But more importantly, under a P3 model, the government has to make massive availability payments to the private consortium that built the bridge to cover their debt servicing and capital costs over that 36-year contract.
Ah, I see. So if Canada is allowed to deduct those massive P3 debt payments as part of the operating expenses before calculating the net profit, the actual pie being split with the U.S. might be relatively small in the early years.
Exactly. The exact accounting formulas are incredibly complex, but ensuring the split is based on net rather than gross, it protects Canada from taking a massive operating loss while subsidizing the U.S. fund.
Okay, speaking of that fund, I'm assuming that 50% cut isn't just disappearing into the void of the U.S. Treasury, right?
No, it's not. The agreement channels those payments into a newly established United States-Canada Economic Development Fund.
Okay.
But the crucial detail here is that this fund is solely controlled by the U.S. government. It is earmarked to be used for the benefit of the U.S. and to facilitate trade between the two countries, but the ultimate oversight sits firmly in Washington.
Got it. And beyond the financial cut, there's also a new layer of governance over the tolls themselves. In the 2012 deal, Canada basically had carte blanche to set the toll rates to ensure they got their money back. What did they actually give up in 2026?
Well, they gave up unilateral control in favor of a specific consent mechanism. Under the new arrangement, Canada must notify the U.S. and seek explicit consent if a proposed toll increase exceeds 10% in a single fiscal year and pushes the rates above the regional average.
The regional average basically being the Ambassador Bridge and the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel down the river, right?
Precisely. And furthermore, they also need U.S. consent if they attempt a toll reduction that would put rates below that regional average.
Oh, I see exactly what's happening there. The U.S. is building guardrails against two very specific scenarios. They don't want Canada to price gouge the American trucking industry to quickly pay off their $6.4 billion debt.
Right.
But they also don't want Canada aggressively dropping the tolls to zero to bankrupt the privately owned Ambassador Bridge and monopolize the entire corridor.
Exactly. It creates a managed pricing environment.
Yeah.
And the U.S. has a 30-day window to respond to any proposed changes that trip those specific triggers.
And what if they just ignore it?
Well, if Washington doesn't respond within 30 days, consent is legally deemed to have been given, which is a smart inclusion because it prevents bureaucratic stalling from just freezing the toll rates indefinitely.
So what does this all mean for you listening at home? Did Canada get fleeced, or was this the only logical move left on the board? Because if you're wondering if they got fleeced, Just imagine paying cash for a brand new commercial truck. You pay the manufacturer, you fuel it up, and just as you are about to pull out of the lot, a regulator steps in front of the bumper and demands a 50% cut of your delivery profits for the next 15 years.
Yeah, and the right to cap your shipping rates.
Right. Just to give you the license plates, it feels a bit like an extortionate shakedown.
From a purely optics standpoint, yeah, it's a very frustrating scenario for the nation that absorbed all the construction risk. But evaluating this deal requires stepping away from pride and looking at the cold, hard mathematics of the alternative. We really have to examine the economic cost of a no-deal scenario.
Okay, so if I'm the Canadian negotiator and I decide to just walk away from the table out of principle, I say, look, we have a 2012 agreement, we built the bridge, we aren't paying a dime more. What is the actual cash burn rate of letting that bridge sit empty?
The immediate financial bleeding would be catastrophic. According to analysis from the Anderson Economic Group, delaying the opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge could cost upwards of $7 million per week.
$7 million per week. Let's break that number down because that is massive.
It is. Roughly $5 million of that weekly figure represents lost toll revenue. The Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority would be missing out on the cash they desperately need to start paying down their obligations to the P3 consortium.
Right.
And then the remaining $2 million a week falls directly on the taxpayers in the form of carrying costs.
Carrying costs meaning you still have to heat the massive customs plazas, you have to run security patrols, maintain the structural integrity, plow the snow in the winter, and just keep the lights on for a bridge that is generating absolutely zero revenue.
Yes. Even if the exact methodology behind that $7 million figure can be debated by economists, the reality of a multi-million-dollar weekly cash burn is undeniable. You are hemorrhaging money just to maintain a monument to a political stalemate.
And that is just the localized bleeding. When you zoom out and look at the macroeconomy, border infrastructure has immense economic value just by existing and speeding up supply chains, even before you count the toll money.
Exactly. The long-term economic projections highlight exactly why this project was initiated in the first place. A study cited by the Global Infrastructure Hub analyzed the cost of unrelieved congestion in the Windsor-Detroit corridor.
Right, because it was already backed up.
Very backed up. And if you fail to add capacity to that border, the bottlenecks ripple through the entire manufacturing sector. They projected that over time, the resulting supply chain friction could cost the U.S. over $11 billion and Canada over $2 billion annually in lost production.
Annually. Meaning tens of thousands of jobs become vulnerable if parts just can't arrive on time. Now, to be fair, a temporary delay in 2026 wouldn't immediately trigger those massive long-term losses, right? Because the old Ambassador Bridge and the tunnel are still operating. Trade wouldn't just plummet to zero overnight.
No, it wouldn't. But relying on aging, congested infrastructure actively suppresses economic growth. The choice in 2026 was never really between a great deal and a bad deal. If Canada rejected the new arrangement, they were choosing a stranded $6.4 billion asset.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
They would face indefinite carrying costs, deferred toll revenues, delayed supply chain efficiencies, and frankly, a globally visible political embarrassment.
So when you analyze it pragmatically, accepting the 2026 arrangement doesn't inherently prove that Canada negotiated badly in 2026 or that they were outmaneuvered. It just reflects the stark reality of having zero leverage once the concrete was poured. You swallow your pride, you give up a portion of your early net revenue, and you accept some toll and guardrails in exchange for actually unlocking the gates.
Exactly. It was a necessary concession to transition the project from a construction site to a functioning economic engine. And operationally, the concession worked.
Right.
The agreement secured a definitive July 27, 2026 opening date for commercial traffic, with a ceremonial opening locked in by August 3rd.
The trucks will finally roll. Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this deep dive. When you look at the entire 14-year saga, the 2012 agreement was undeniably a massive infrastructure achievement. It solved incredibly complex financing and construction hurdles that made this bridge physically possible when literally nobody else could pay for it.
It did, but the architecture of that original deal left Canada exposed to a critical political risk. The gap between building a piece of international infrastructure and actually possessing the federal authority to operate it was a blind spot that, well, perhaps should have been anticipated, even if it couldn't have been entirely neutralized at the time.
Yeah, and the 2026 deal was simply the premium paid to insure against that exact risk when it finally came due. Before we wrap up, a quick note on the sources driving today's conversation. This deep dive is part one of a 3-part editorial arc originally developed for the Sanity Project. The investigative analysis was led by Rachel Bennett with deep dive research from Michael Reeves.
Excellent work by them.
Really great stuff. And if you want to dig into the actual economic studies and the original 2012 and 2026 documents we discussed today, head over to thesanity.org to read their full written report.
And this is just the beginning of the analysis.
Absolutely. In part 2 of this arc, we are going to zoom in on the specific economic fallout. We will be asking the hard questions about the supply chain, like what exactly would a physically completed bridge that could not legally open have cost the Canadian economy over the long term?
It's a huge question. And as we close out today's exploration, I want to leave everyone with a broader concept to mull over. This entire saga raises a profound question about the nature of sovereignty in the modern era.
Oh, definitely.
If a sovereign nation can fully finance, design, build, and legally own a piece of critical international infrastructure, yet still be forced to yield a portion of its revenue and governance just to turn the lights on, what does that actually mean for the future of global megaprojects?
Yeah.
In an era of tightly integrated supply chains, is it ever really possible to own an international border crossing outright?
It really makes you wonder. I mean, you can buy the land, pour the concrete, and hold the deed in your hand, but if you don't control the padlock on the gate at the end of the street, whose driveway is it really? If you enjoyed this breakdown, please hit subscribe, leave a comment, and give us a like. It helps us keep bringing you these deep dives. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time.
You can pour the concrete, you can hold the deed, but if you don't control the padlock at the end of the driveway, whose bridge is it really? If this one made you rethink who's actually in charge of the roads you drive on, subscribe to the Sanity Project and share it with someone who still cares about the fine print. See you next time.
If you want more facts and less fear, hit subscribe. Check out the next breakdown wherever you're listening or watching. Stay sane, Canada.